All right, you're
Okay. Hi, everyone. We have a few new people here today. My name is Cynthia Smoot. I live in Tampa, St. Pete, Florida. I know there's some folks here that have lived in Florida or still live there. And my friend and colleague Vickery Eckhoff and I are going to talk a little bit about dealing with media and also the narrative that has been and still exists around wild horses. And Vickery has some amazing figures to share with you that I think might make your head spin around a little bit. So we're going to try to cover that and then leave time for questions, okay, so that you can ask your questions as well. So first, Vickery is going to kick us off today with what she's been working on and some information you're going to find quite interesting.
Hi, everybody.
Good morning.
It's a pleasure to be here, and I gotta make this taller. Oops. All right. To talk about wild horses. I got into this issue by writing about the slaughter issue started in 2012, and also tracking how badly media depicted that and why. And the lesson for wild horse advocates and media is that it is a replica of what happened on the slaughter issue. Same disinformation, some of the same perpetrators, and so I've been following that for 10 years and have spent a lot of time talking to editors, getting errors corrected, and also studying the Bureau of Land Management's communications operations, and then also looking at news coverage to get a sense of how the Bureau of Land Management is directing the message that everybody's hearing today. So let me just bring up a slide and we will get started. Okay, so unity is an important thing to achieve for any group, and particularly when they disagree, but are all kind of working to better the same policy. And I think we would all agree that there's a lot of room and progress to be made in terms of unifying the messages that advocacy groups put out to the media. It's a little harder than it appears, and the reason why I know that, as I said, is because I took a real deep dive into the Bureau of Land Management's press release arm. So I just want to show you a little bit about that. Okay, so here is the Bureau of Land Management's press releases page. And you can see that you can search it by keyword, you can browse by region and by year, except you can't browse for 2022. Apparently that does not exist for them yet. But I put in the word wild horses, and as you can see, look at all the results. And this is just probably going back to 2010, when the Bureau of Land Management started actively putting out news announcements on what it was doing with the Wild Horses and Burros program, to today, where the efforts have definitely multiplied. So what I did was I focused on the news releases since the beginning of this year to see how far they've traveled in the media and through which media groups. So let's look at some numbers. Okay, those numbers probably don't mean much to you, but let me explain what they mean. 49 press releases were put out by the Bureau of Land Management just year to date, 49. If you look at any other topic that the BLM puts out press releases on, you will not find nearly this number. You will find almost nothing on livestock. And just so that you know, the Bureau of Land Management does even put livestock on its website in the same way that it does the Wild Horses and Burros program, which you can easily find in the main navigation. But in order to find the livestock program, which costs a heck of a lot more, you have to go down through its natural resources page. So it's very deliberately set up so that you can't find it. But I encourage you all to try. Okay, so 49 press releases from the Bureau of Land Management. How far did they reach? Recently, I read an article by an advocate, and in the first paragraph, she said, there's not a lot of coverage. Well, there is, and these numbers prove it. So, 175 articles were generated by a single BLM press release issued on January 5th. 175. You wonder why the wrong messages are going out in such a uniform way with all the same language, the same setup for the articles. Many of them are cut and pasted right from the Bureau of Land Management and delivered under the as news. They are called news, okay? So this press release generated by the Bureau of Land Management was, this is the title, BLM releases annual plan for wild horse and burro gatherers and fertility control operations. And look at some of the news organizations that ran with that. ABC News, NBC, The Hill, The Washington Post, all the most trusted mainstream news organizations. And then, of course, at the end of that is the Associated Press. 165 of those 175 articles based on a single press release were by Scott Sonner of the Associated Press. And to be fair to all the news organizations that I'm commenting on, I went back through 3 months of Google alerts and I looked at every single wild horse article on it, and I analyzed whether or not the content was from the Bureau of Land Management 100%, or if there was some combination, maybe 80% Bureau of Land Management and 20% advocacy. And just so that you know how I did that, I created this spreadsheet. Okay, so this shows on the left-hand margin the dates of all the press releases as of yesterday, what field offices put them out, 49, and what topics were: gatherers, the adoption incentive program. And every one of the press releases is linked. And then I took all the content for every press release and I put it in this spreadsheet because I wanted to do a word search to see how often certain words of disinformation appeared within these press releases. And what I found is that it's not accidental that all of these read the same, and that the news articles for different states and different localities read the same. It's because the Bureau of Land Management has coordinated all this disinformation through its communications department. So back to, anyway, so you can see, the other thing that I did is that I created separate columns and I broke the paragraphs down one per column so that I could track down and see the pattern of how these press releases are written, mostly because in accusing the Bureau of Land Management of disinformation, and I don't say that lightly, but what you can see in this spreadsheet is that the disinformation is repeated the same way in the same order. So back to my other slide. Okay, 165 articles by the Associated Press. You know, the Associated Press is the world's largest news distributor. So the Bureau of Land Management is really lucky to have them as a partner. And okay, so 154. Scott Sonner wrote one article that was picked up by 154 news outlets, but this one wasn't based on a Bureau of Land Management press release. It was based on a lawsuit by several advocacy groups, and most of these articles appeared under the headline, U.S. Judge Won't Rein in Federal Wild Horse Roundup in Nevada, but I did find that this same article appeared almost identically under 12 different headlines. And that news coverage came out in January 2022. 5939. 59 is the number of articles that the Associated Press put out over a period of years. And I have another, so I just want to show you. I went back and got all the headlines and who wrote them and when, and so you'll see many, many articles. 39 of them were by Scott Sonner. And by the way, I don't call him out lightly. For the most part, whenever I comment or I report on disinformation, I don't like to mention the reporters because they get hounded by people. I don't think anybody here would pick up the phone or write to Scott and say, I'm on to you, brother. But there are people who will do that. So whenever I include a name here, I want you to all be really careful. Please don't go after these people. Okay, so Scott wrote 39 of those 59 articles, and some of them didn't even have a byline on them. Without a byline, you can't really know who to contact to tell them that their information is wrong. And it is true that several years ago, the Associated Press began reporting using artificial intelligence, where machine learning, they would just give the computer some information, and computer programs can be programmed to write some really convincing articles that seem like a human wrote them. So, kind of startling, right? I think if you haven't bothered digging around in this dry topic, you might think, oh, why is media like this? And, I can do something about that. I can write an opinion piece, and it's going to somehow get the message out there. And the unfortunate thing is that is not true. Cynthia and I spent a lot of time in the fall. We worked on a handout together for people to send to congressmen and give to reporters to educate them on the livestock program, which of course is the biggest piece of disinformation is what is missing. And we also got a letter out there to different news outlets asking them not to report on the 50th anniversary of the Wild Horses and Burros program without looking at the data that peer digitized for the Bureau of Land Management, showing how bad rangeland conditions were, the reason being livestock. But we're here today to tell you what you can do. And I don't want to discourage anyone from being invested in this issue. However, writing an opinion piece is not going to put a dent in any of that. And specifically because, I read a lot of articles by advocates, by news organizations, and advocates often get information wrong. Or they speak about humane issues, FYI. I don't dismiss them, but I worked really hard to get to get better representation and media coverage for the slaughter issue. And while advocates were yelling, oh, it's so inhumane, which it is, nobody cared. Humane laws are never enforced. They exist, the Humane Methods of Slaughter Act, transportation to slaughter, lots of humane laws that do not get enforced. What ended what got slaughter taken off the table or defunded back in 2014 and ever since then was a food safety issue. And so I urge you all, if you're going to act to change how this is reported on, you need to not just be unified in your thought, you need to have a strategy, a command center. You got to put some resources behind it. You've got to stick to a message instead of one person's talking about, one person's talking about one thing and one's talking about roundups and one's talking about fertility issues. I can tell you that I've read the opinion pieces of some very prominent wild horse groups, and I'm not a wild horse advocate. I'm an advocate for the public's right to be properly informed. And so I looked at that opinion piece a little bit different than if I was an advocate. And what I saw was arguments that kind of supported roundups. They were talking about we've got to do the fertility control because of the population issues. There isn't a population issue. But this particular wild horse group is like they are 100% sure they are right. That's all they're pushing is PZP instead of roundups. That's one of those issues that PZP, in a way, is an argument for a roundup because it says there's too many of them. So, I urge you all to get your facts, and also source them. I see a lot of opinion pieces and articles with pieces of data, and it's not sourced. Anything that's not sourced is not trustworthy. So that's why I say I encourage you to be invested in this issue, but I also want you to know the limitations of each individual acting individually to do what they think is the right message, because it's not ever going to displace the two Goliaths you have here, the Bureau of Land Management and the Associated Press. So I'm going to let Cynthia pick up from here. I hope that these numbers have been eye-opening. I think they're really worth taking seriously.
Are you going to have questions? Or
Yes, at the end.
Okay.
Thank you.
Guys, I have to tell you, I admired Vickery's work long before I ever got to meet her. And she had an article that she did for, I think, Forbes or something about, I think the name of it was Why We All Love Cowboys, Why the Media Loves Cowboys So Wild Horses Will Die. And when I read that article, I was like, man, this woman is right on about this. And so it just resonated with me, and I knew that our paths would cross, and then somehow here we are. As a member of the media, this resonates with me in the fiber of my being, because I am an old school journalist. I grew up at a time when we were watching, we had 3 networks, CBS, NBC, ABC, that was it. You watched Papa Cronkite and he told you the way it was, right? So I go way back, and I've worked in this medium for a very long time, and I know where things have gotten better and I know where they've gotten worse. So I am more than willing to share with any of you today that you think you will be interacting with the media, say at a roundup or in a news gathering situation, that will help you become a more effective advocate and get the real message out there. Because as Vickery just said, it is really hard to break through this narrative that has been perpetuated by the BLM since the act was passed, since they became in charge of the wild horses. It just goes back that far. And even today, meeting with members of Congress, every single one of them said to me, well, they're overpopulated, right? So everybody's drinking the Kool-Aid, everybody, and it's the first thing that comes out of their mouths. And so I believe somebody said yesterday, stop right there, Let's just go ahead and dispel that myth right off the bat, okay? And armed with the facts, you can do that. And then all of a sudden you get this, wow, I didn't know that. You mean how many cattle are we talking about versus wild horses? They take up what percentage of our public lands? It's this tiny little bit. The BLM will have you believe there is a wild horse around every corner, eating everything in sight. And the truth, as we know, is something different. We also live in this media world today that makes it so much more difficult. We are in a 24-hour news cycle all the time. It never stops. And so shiny objects get the attention for a few hours, maybe a day, and then it goes away. So I see my position here today really is just to be, as a member of the media, to help you guys know that when you are acting as an advocate, that you are in a position to, one, be the expert. Quite often, you will be the expert talking to a reporter, whether you feel that way or not. And if you don't feel like you have the knowledge and the information, the correct and sourced information, then you find somebody who does. And you make sure that person is the person that reporter gets to talk to. Because quite often what happens, and this is what happened in Colorado last fall, and this is when I kind of really did a deep dive. I happened to be in Denver watching television when the sand wash roundup began. And anybody here familiar with the Colorado situation last fall? Anybody here? They had a big roundup, took 70% of the horses. Yeah. So I saw a TV story, and I'm sitting there and I'm going, oh my God. That's like right off the BLM press release, didn't even bother to drill down at all. So I made it a point to contact that reporter who was at a different network than mine and say, hey, Ruben, or I can't remember his name now, but just want to let you know I caught your story and, glad to see you're covering the issue, but here's a few things you probably don't know that's not in that press release. And with Vickery, that's what she and I have been trying to do, and she's done this amazing deep dive on these numbers that just take my breath away, because she's putting in the hard data here to show you that there really is a disinformation campaign going on. And so when you go and speak to members of Congress or their aides, this is the messaging they've been getting. And so they don't know any differently. And so quite often when they hear this stuff, they're hearing it for the first time. I mean, I just sat down with a 20-some-year congresswoman, and when I started talking to her today, she's like, I didn't know that. And she's like, been on the House Resources Committee or something. I mean, it's like, you're just kind of going, you want to go, really? You didn't know that? So we can't presume knowledge. We never presume knowledge. But we also want to make sure that we need to do a better job at covering the subject, which is why we have sort of formed this little alliance here, because we want reporters to get the whole story and to ask some of the questions. Why is it that we are always blaming the horses when the BLM's own data that has been so nicely compiled for us by Peer shows that cattle, in the words of the BLM, is the number one degrader of our public lands? Cattle, not wild horses. So we want to give the reporters, the people that are out there doing this kind of work, we at least want to open their eyes to, gee, have you seen this statistic? Have you seen this number? Are you familiar with the grazing program? Do you know what that is? They say that there's no more food left for these wild horses here, but guess what? They just put 2,000 sheep out there. How is it they have forage for them but not for the horses? Will somebody please ask the BLM that, preferably you who are doing the story? So that's what she and I are trying to do, and she's right. Trying to do that with a monolith like the Associated Press is so difficult, because she knows, and I know because I now look at all this, is that quite often, for lots of different reasons, budget cuts, mergers, shrinkage of staff, the fact that now you have social media to feed on top of everything else. I mean, we have reporters now called MMJs, and that's a fancy name for a one-man band. When I was coming along, that's what we called them, one-man bands, which meant you went out with a camera and you shot your own story. Everything, okay? You had to set up the tripod to get your stand-up. Well, guess what? Full circle, they're back with a fancy new name, multimedia journalist, okay? And I'm not sure they make a whole lot more money than they did when I was starting out, comparatively speaking. But those people in particular, and especially in smaller markets, smaller TV stations that aren't a top 10, top 20 market, those people have this Herculean task to do. I mean, if they're going out to cover a roundup, say, they go cover the roundup, they have to go shoot it, get all the interviews, write it, edit it themselves, and then also feed. Don't forget to feed the Twitter, the Instagram, maybe the TikTok, the Facebook. Don't forget my web script with pictures. So this is all being asked of one person in one day, in a few hours. And we want it for the 4 o'clock news. And I want it for the 5. And don't forget the 6, and be sure to turn something for 10 or 11 while you're coming out the door. So you see what you're up against here. So the more resources, good resources and good information that you can give to people who are doing that job, the better we can get our messaging out. So we become the conduits to try to help get this message to become more truthful and more factual. Please.
I just wanted to add something to what
Please,
you
come on
said.
up, come on. We'll just tag team here.
I think one of the really important things, and probably one of the harder things for advocates to do, is to think outside of their own perspective when speaking to a congressman or a reporter. I would like to encourage you to think as a congressman with the constituent, taxpayers, okay? The BLM, by the way, one of the things that it says is that the adoption program saves taxpayers a lot of money. And they've said elsewhere that rounding up horses saves public lands, it's from the climate change and from degradation of the rangeland, and saves taxpayers. That is not true. And so, instead, and I don't mean to harp on humane issues, but when you're talking to an elected official, tell them that this is bad for taxpayers and tell them why, because that reaches a lot of their constituents. If they have constituents who don't care about horses, maybe they hate horses, maybe they're like, well, they're really pretty, but there's too many of them. You want them to focus on things that are bad for taxpayers, because they can get voted into office on that basis. They're not gonna lose an election over wild horses, but they will if their constituents are paying too much for a program that benefits a large, somewhat, a large industry, like the livestock industry. Livestock industry gets tons of subsidies. Nobody knows about it. So that's why I say try and get outside of the wild horse bubble and think more broadly, and I think you'll get more traction.
Let's go ahead and ask.
Could I quickly ask you a question?
Yeah.
For anyone who's going before a congressman or congresswoman, could you give us, like, if you have 5 minutes, the bullet points to hit?
Let me get my glasses. Hold on a second.
While she's getting her glasses, let me just say, absolutely. I mean, today I saw that it's all in tailoring that approach to what in that particular district. For instance, today Marty Irby was with me, and he happened to have a conversation a few weeks ago with a cattle rancher from Florida. Yes, we are, like, believe it or not, big cattle, big cow-calf operations there, all privately held, nothing on public lands. This man was complaining to him about how they are at an economic disadvantage because of all of the public grazing out west, where they're getting a free ride, huge free ride, and that their beef then they can charge much less for it than the Florida person can, and I'm sure that applies to other states which has any kind of beef operation. So that's a competitive disadvantage, and especially in a lot of Republican districts, that kind of competitive disadvantage and the money that she was talking about, they will listen to that.
More to your point, if I was talking to a congressperson, first of all, I would tell them that a very large government agency is using taxpayer funds to disenfranchise and disinform taxpayers. I think that's really scandalous, and I don't think they know that. Bureau of Land Management is reputed to be not very well managed, but they have a really shiny, beautiful communications department that's very effective at putting out information that benefits the livestock industry. So I would say also talk to them about regulatory capture, and that the Bureau of Land Management is supposed to regulate the livestock industry and not be a front for them, not be a partner in getting them more subsidies and allowing them to use wild horses to subsidize their businesses. I think the issue has become really popular with ranchers because they can make money off it, not just from the additional forage that they get for that $1.35 a month, but from getting $5 a month to be an off-range contractor, pasture for wild horses. I think I would tell them that contrary to what the BLM says, and you'll see this in a lot of news articles, wild horses are a huge problem. William Perry Pendley said they were an existential crisis. I think Field and Stream just did an article saying that they were a huge problem. They're on 4% of all Western land. The West is 11 states. The collective acreage, I calculated this at one point, but if you compare the 26.9 million acres that wild horses are on, it's 4%. And I once went after David Phillips' article at the New York Times for saying across the West wild horses, and I said, I know it's not much of a headline, but across 4% of the West, wild horses are somewhat of a problem. That's not much of a headline, but so I would point out how small wild horses really are within the context of, all the land that they're supposedly trampling and overeating on.
Vickery, is that 4% of public lands or all?
All, but when reporters say across the West, they're not saying across public lands.
Right.
And I did break out the numbers according to what percentage of wild horses are on public lands versus all western lands, which of course includes public and private. But because reporters don't distinguish, I felt that I did not need to do that either. I think, the rangeland health conditions is a huge way to show that the Bureau of Land Management is hiding its own data and then blaming the outcome on the wrong subset of, four-legged creatures. I probably have a few more, but I can't think of them at the
That's
moment.
okay, that's okay. Any other questions? Right here.
I have two, if I can. So, just in the last few days, there's been a horrendous thing that happened. We're up to, I think, 85 horses that are dead at Canyon City. Okay, there's two, a CNN picked it up and a CBS affiliate.
Can't hear you.
Both of those have places to comment on it. It's all over Facebook. Comment. Anything else we can do to, we want to get more stories, we want to get the truth?
Okay, so she's talking about, we have something lethal going on at Canyon City, which is a holding facility in Colorado. And she mentioned that CNN has picked it up now, and a CBS affiliate. And I'm not sure which market that's in, maybe Denver, possibly Denver. And the New York Times, I haven't seen the article today because I hit the ground running this morning, but the New York Times picked it up. So what will happen in cases like that is that when, say that CBS story, okay? So that CBS story in Denver, okay, that's a local television market, but they feed that product to all the other CBS stations, just so you guys know how this goes, okay? Feed it to all the other CBS stations, so they all, affiliates and owned and operated CBS stations now have access to that material. So let's say if you live in, I don't know, let me just pick a city, somebody throw a city out here.
Harrisburg.
Where? Harrisburg, PA. Okay, I think you have a TV station there. Do you have one that does CBS? Okay. I would say what you could do, go on their website, see who the news people are. You can call their news desk and say, hey, I am Jane Doe and I live here and I'm one of your viewers. And are you aware of what's going on out in Colorado? Did you see it on CBS? Well, no, ma'am, but we are CBS. Well, yes, indeed, and you probably can get that story, and I think that we would like to see that here so people know about how our tax dollars are being spent.
And we can piggyback on, last Saturday was the nationwide rally, and a lot of us, including Harrisburg, got TV coverage. So those reporters are already hooked in.
Absolutely,
So that
good
was a
point. She says that.
follow-up story.
Exactly, great follow-up story. So I'm glad you brought this up. So she said they did get coverage last weekend for the state capitol rallies. Go ahead and get hold of those people, those same people. If a reporter comes out and covers something that you do in the wild horse realm, you get to know that reporter personally, okay? And when I say that, I mean, obviously, you're not going to be sitting outside his or her house because then they will put you down as a stalker and it will not go well. But what I'm saying is that they will listen to you, especially if you're showing a little favoritism and there's a little competition with the newsrooms for stories. So let's say, hey, you did such a great job with that. Did you know about this? Would you make sure that your station picks up on this? And maybe even you can find a local angle and, oh, I happen to know a vet. And this vet might have an idea about what's going on with those horses out there. Okay, now you're localizing the story. Hey, I know somebody who has Mustangs, who has a couple of adopted Mustangs right here in Harrisburg. You know what? We could set you up. You could go do that story, meet those adopted Mustangs, talk to a veterinarian, and now you have found a way to do a story I care about in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania for something that's happening 6 states away in Colorado. And that's how you do it.
By the way, I do want to say, be careful with the information, I don't mean you personally, that you give off the cuff to a reporter. I did hear some coverage from one of the rallies, and the advocate quoted stated there were 100,000 wild horses on public lands, and that does not help. And all this information exists on, that kind of information on the Bureau of Land Management's website. And I know a lot of you probably don't love data, and to be frank, I don't really love it either, but I think it reveals stuff that's important to dig for. And so go on that BLM website and browse around, find out where stuff is, compare, one state to another state, and just know that data and know exactly the source of it and know that you're right before you give it. Because false information, wherever it's coming from, doesn't matter, it's not helpful.
Here.
I have a question. You're asking us to look for data and you're directing us to the BLM website. Why would we think their data would be accurate?
The estimates of wild horses are on the Bureau of Land Management's website. And if you notice, with all of the coverage that they get, look at that coverage and it will say 86,000 horses according to the they don't just say it, they say according to the BLM. That, I'm not saying that those numbers are right, but if you deviate from that, it's just going to make, it always makes advocates look bad when something doesn't line up that's official to the BLM. So just be aware of what the BLM's official numbers are.
Okay, that makes sense.
Exactly, and frankly, when it comes to the expenditures, their own numbers tell the story.
Yeah.
You don't have to make anything up. Just look at the real numbers. Look at the real numbers and then see. I mean, it's right in your face. I mean, anybody can look at it, add it up, and go, "This is not a good deal for taxpayers." Yes.
I was gonna say, and what I always do is I print their own documents out. When I go in, I sit there and they say, "Well, where did you get these numbers?" BLM document. It's all government documents. So
Exactly. Exactly.
You're using their own stuff against them because you're.
That's right.
Whether they're right or wrong, this is what they're saying. So
Right,
you can
because
say
we
that.
don't have our own count.
No.
We don't have our own reliable count. There may be agencies here that have an idea, but we're using their number. This is the number they say that they have surveyed, and that is the number. Yes.
I think we've all gathered enough facts here over the past few days. I'm only interested in facts. I personally don't even watch the news anymore, no offense, ladies. But because they're just reading scripts. We need to get these facts out. I listened in on 3 sessions today, and all of them were mentioning, Senator Corey was going around with his sheet about the vaccine and this and that, which is great. But we all presented facts that they didn't know about. You have the list of who the BLM is sending their bullshit out to. I'm used to going after the competition and killing it. We need to go and do exactly what they're doing. We need a list of every senator, every congressman, and send out these fact sheets. These are the facts. You can listen to what the BLM is saying. This is what we're telling you is fact. You cannot dispute that. And this needs to be presented
Okay,
to
and
everybody.
I don't.
And social media, because no offense, but CNN and AP, they're going down the drain. They are not big. They're losing a lot of
And
readership.
Cynthia, before you cover that, could you just, because her question is something that I answer for a lot of people, is, where do I get the information? I mean, all of that information for representatives and senators is on their websites. It does take a while to write it all down. But a lot of people think it's absolutely useless to send them the information. I'm constantly saying, just send them the facts because they don't know. Tell them that they don't know.
They don't know. No, I had 3 meetings today and really found out for myself sitting there that they don't know. Even people who are seasoned representatives who've been there and been to lots of committee meetings, so they don't know, and the staff doesn't know. And so, they count on the same, on Capitol Hill, their aides are getting information from the BLM, which is then being sent up to their members of Congress. And if that's all they have to deal with, then that's what they're making decisions on. So we need to give them the rest of the story, as I call it. We need to give them the part of the story the BLM doesn't want to talk about. The grazing stuff, how much, the subsidies, how much money that program loses every year for American taxpayers. Completely unsustainable. I mean, we are heading for some kind of budget Armageddon with this whole project that I really don't know what will happen, and it could be quite horrible when it does. I mean, we are now approaching a time that we're going to have more horses in holding than we are on the range. We're getting there fast.
I just want to say one more thing. You have the Republicans right here. They have your ear if you just go after the money issue. I'm speaking as the elephant in the room, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you said that, because that was what I encountered today too, was that the Republican that I sat down with, his aide, you know, as soon as we talked about the anti-competitive, you know, the disadvantage that the private cattle, you know, the people on private land have versus public lands, man, he perked right up.
Exactly.
And then when we showed him some of the numbers for the subsidies and how much money this program is bleeding, is hemorrhaging,
It is.
those are shocking numbers to people. So yeah,
I'm not
absolutely.
paying for that anymore.
You know, she's right about that. Yes.
Speaking of, to the point of people don't know, Congressman, Americans, I mean, if I mention this to any of my friends, horses, right? Okay, don't shoot me now. We've all seen the commercial by the ASPCA of the puppies, and they play the sad music, and it's very sad, and it's a problem. We need to get a commercial on TV.
I can't hear you.
We need to
She
get-
says we need a commercial, sort of like the ASPCA. I will say that ad to me is about fundraising,
Yeah.
and that's what that is.
Would educate. I mean, 9 out of 10 people I talk to don't know about the horse.
We're trying to make one with some.
Okay, Ashley Ava says they're trying to come up with a national commercial of some type. I know there've been more billboards in various places, but you're right. The ignorance on this issue is huge.
Yeah.
It's huge, and so this is the hill that we're all trying to go up, right? Vickery and I were talking about this before we came out here. You know, from where we sit, and you can tell me if this is the way you feel, but I feel like that a well-informed advocate who can form a relationship with a representative or a senator's aide back in their home district, okay? And be able to go in and get to the point where you can have a sit down, or you can have a text or an email with, and that they get to know you so that when the issues come up and it's no big surprise to hear from you, that's totally invaluable. Because I walked away today, even being in media, and like I know these people and they know me from being on TV, but I left with many more cell phone numbers than what I started out with. And so now I'm going to be texting and saying, hey, this is coming up on this date. Please, I hope that Representative so-and-so understands that we really need his vote on this, okay? So that it'll come up. So, you know, it's all about relationships, right? I mean, it comes down to human relationships. And so the more that you can advocate and be factual, not emotional, you know, the one thing that I have been on my soapbox about is that when I look back historically at the coverage of this issue, is so often we have mainly women crying at the scene of a roundup, weeping for the horses, and I would be there crying my eyes out too, I get it, but that's what ends up on TV. And then the other side doesn't take us seriously. It's a bunch of, they write you off as a bunch of hysterical women, and that's what happens.
Right.
When we need to be armed with the facts, and how about a little bit of anger and standing up for the horses, you know, and I'm not saying you get in anybody's face either. We should all be respectful. And don't kill the messenger either. I know you were saying don't beat up on Scott Sonner, but really, I mean, most reporters are just trying to get their job done. And most reporters, not all networks are not equal, all news sources are not equal.
I wanna say something about that.
Go ahead.
I went and took a look at the reporters who are reporting on this, and many times, some of the newer news distributors don't even have reporters, they have production coordinators who will turn out 5 pieces of news a day, and they're not paid a lot, so they're maybe making $20-25 a story. And even if you look, there's a website for journalists called Muck Rack. And so if you want to see what somebody's published, you can go to Muck Rack. I'm on there, Scott's on there, you're probably on there. Muck Rack. We'll get you on Muck Rack. Well, in any event, you can see how many stories these reporters that everybody trusts are putting out a day or a week. And that will give you a sense, they're not doing that because they love writing so much. I think most of them are doing it to feed their families and pay their mortgages, just like anybody else. And I'm not saying that's an excuse, but I think we have to, consider what is the motivation behind this. I don't think the intent is to be harmful or duplicitous. But I also think that at a certain level, when you're working really hard, you can't really afford to think about what your disinformation might cost someone else. So, you know, and with regard to the BLM, I think even people at the BLM don't know what the story is. You know, they honestly believe what they're saying, but their own data contradicts it. So, you know, there are opportunities to take their data and use their other data to discredit it. I think that's the sweet spot, because everybody trusts them. It's kind of like with a crime where everybody thinks the situation is this, and then you find out that, and all of a sudden the story turns around.
Is anybody trying to
Exactly.
educate AP Scott? I mean, he.
What?
Is anybody trying to educate Scott Sonner?
I have tried that.
She's tried, yeah.
I have tried that. I have given, and I'm sure other people in this
Yeah.
I'm sure other people in this room have tried that as well. He knows about the public lands livestock program, the livestock grazing. One of his colleagues, Brian Maffley at the Salt Lake Tribune, actually did a story in which he mentioned peers revealing of the rangeland conditions and how wild horses were being rounded up because of cattle damage. So, you know, Scott is aware of that, but I will tell you, having spoken to Scott many times and having spoken to his editor many times, when I have pointed out to Scott and to the reporter who got all the slaughter issue wrong, I said, your source did not tell the truth. That's an error, you must correct it. And their response every single time is, I accurately reported what the subject said. And when I pointed out to his editors, the same editor for the bad slaughter coverage and the bad wild horse coverage, and I won't mention her name, I said, your source got dates and data wrong. And she said, I said he got facts wrong, and she said, dates and data aren't facts, they're opinions.
Sorry.
Yeah. Yes. This woman now works for the New York Times.
So,
But she was
My
a
opinion is
top
she was-
editor in charge of many newsrooms. And I had a lot of conversations with her. And they refused to correct their coverage of the slaughter issue, even though I proved it to them. And then after 18 articles with the same error in it, repeated over and over, and I had notified them of this repeatedly. They quietly changed their coverage, but did not add an editor's note, which is required in their guidelines. And she wrote to me and she said, you know, you really changed our reporting. And I was like, well, you could have done it a long time ago. But it's just very frustrating. I don't think there's anything to be gained by going after the Associated Press or any of these news organizations, because it's embarrassing for them to be corrected. And it's also, you know, they spend money if they do a good job. The worse job they do, the cheaper it is.
And quite often, and I know this for a fact, I mean, especially in smaller markets where they don't have time, they'll just take that AP, whatever it is, they'll take that BLM press release and just slap it on their website like it's a news story.
And they will call it news. And by the way, I found an AP story just 2 days ago about ranching, all about ranching. No byline, and I was like, I didn't know they reported on the ranching side of things the way I was kind of shocked. It was like an advertorial.
Yeah. Do we have time for one more question, Heather? We have
You
time.
can still go for another 10-15 minutes.
Okay, go ahead.
Actually, I have a two-part question, but first I would like to say to Vickery, you say you don't like data, but we all depend on all your research.
Yes. She's the ultimate fact checker, everybody.
I do like it, I just don't like the process of collecting it.
Well, I remember 4 or 5 years ago, we were at one of the National Advisory Board meetings, and last minute, Ginger Catherine's texted me and says, run down to the hotel, get this printed out, and we're gonna pass it out to everybody, one of your charts.
I know, it's such a valuable resource, isn't
Yeah.
it? It's nice having a pit bull on our side. I like that, so, yeah.
But my questions are, one about relationships with staffers and one about with reporters. With staffers, Charlotte Rowe and I have built relationships with staffers of our representative Joe Neguse and with our 2 senators. And a few years ago, when Joe Neguse first came to Congress, we talked to his staffer for hours. She actually came to us to meet with us several times. And after that, he started writing the letters and in support of the Wild Horse and Borough issues. But now that staffer's gone, and he has constant turnover in his office, and they all go, "Oh, we didn't know that." It's like,
Yeah,
What do you
and
do?
that's just gonna be the case that happens. I mean, staffers overturn, especially at the lower levels. Chiefs of staff, they all tend to stick around for a while, but you know, Marty, you know this too. I mean, staffers come and go, don't they? And so
And
it's,
that office is especially,
Yeah.
has a high turn, I don't know why, but they have a especially high turn.
so you just have to keep re-educating, and it's very laborious, but it's definitely worth it, especially if you know there's legislation
yes.
coming down the pike that we need co-sponsors for, or that we need to vote for. I mean, those are the critical times, I
He's
think.
already gone on to the co-sponsor for the helicopter bill.
Yeah,
He's
so-
wonderful.
So it is, that I think, you know, I just think if there's one thing an advocate's looking to do, other than sit down and write an op-ed, which as Vickery has pointed out, really doesn't have a lot of impact, especially if it's just from a citizen versus somebody that has a big organization behind them, like, you know, like Scott, and you know, people with an organization like that has a little more impact than just, you know, me writing or you writing to your local newspaper.
And then the second part was about relationships with reporters.
Mhm.
It doesn't matter, I don't think, how you start that relationship. It could be with a contact, say, hey, can you add this to your story or whatever. But I met a reporter, a print reporter for the Steamboat Pilot. His name was Dylan Anderson. Met him at the SOWH Roundup, and he was going around interviewing everybody. And then I met him again at the Florence adoption sale auction event, and we talked again there. Last night he called me to ask me about the horses at Canyon City. So those relationships are important, and building that. But my question is, in his first article from the SOWH Roundup, he was interviewing all the BLM people there too, and his editor made him put in both, even though he was sympathetic to us, his editor made him put in both sides and put in the BLM line.
Can I just say, I wouldn't romanticize that form of reporting too much. When somebody does that, it's because they don't know the issue. So they can say, he said this, she said, he said, she said, and he doesn't have to fact check any of it. And I'm not saying, you know, anybody should pursue journalism the way I did, but I wrote mine based on what the issue really was and what the facts really were. And some of those articles took me months to write.
Yeah.
That is not economically feasible for most reporters. So I would caution you, if a reporter is asking you a bunch of questions, you know that if you mention the livestock issue, they're going to edit that down. Maybe they're going to get rid of it entirely because they're like a script writer. We all know, Ashley, you know script. You have to create, there's a certain formula to them. And you have to balance things out, you have to highlight, and so the reporter generally has a thought in their head about what this story is about. It's not about what's happening, it's about controversy. This person feels this way, and that's what they go for, feelings. I would recommend to all of you that if a reporter asks you for your opinion, write down a sentence about what you want it to be and say, you can use that, and if you don't use that, don't include me. Because I constantly see these kind of watered down, kind of feely, emotional, and I know this sounds critical, but you know, as a subject of an interview, you have a certain amount of control. You can choose not to participate. You can say, listen, last time I told you this and you didn't include it, so either include this or count me out. And I and Ginger Catherines once managed to get a story killed by both refusing to give an opinion. And because this reporter was looking for our opinions and we didn't give them, she couldn't write that story. So, you know, everybody likes to see their name in print, but you have to really think like, what's this advancing? And if what it advances is this ongoing narrative about there really aren't any facts here, just a lot of feelings, you have to don't participate in that. You know, we've all done that, thinking, oh, you know, that comment I made about livestock is gonna get in there, and it doesn't. It never does. So be in command of what you are offering that person content that they can get paid for. I think you have a right to demand that they quote you the way you want to be quoted, and if not, no deal.
Well, this particular reporter did put in about the livestock issue for Sandwash.
But they never go further than that, though. It's just a line.
Yeah, that's, and I hope I never have to interview her, by the way, because it's be like, oh my God, you know, can I say that? You're not gonna talk to me anymore?
Yeah.
TV's a whole different animal, you know, they just don't have the time if it's a day turn, you know. I was looking back at all the coverage, and it was unusual that there was a lot of coverage in Colorado, because the only reason that happened that way is because the Denver television stations were within like an hour of the Roundup site. Otherwise, you wouldn't have had any coverage, because most of these roundups happen in places that do not have, or TV stations are 3 or 4 hours away, and they're simply not going to commit the resources to do it. They're just not. So by that I mean that you've got people coming out that, just like the congressmen and the aides, they don't know anything about this. Whatever they're hearing that day from the BLM and from the other people, and they're going to look for the crying person. I know this. I do this for a living, you know, because that's the emotion of the story. So if you see that starting to happen, and you see, you know, you're someplace where, you know, you can see him over there, and there's a weeping woman photographer who's telling the reporter, I've been shooting, you know, I've been taking pictures of these horses all my life, and this one when he was born, and now he's this, and he's being rounded up. It's sad, I get that, and that's fine, there's a place for that, but help steer that reporter, just say, you know what, there's a lot more to this story than what you probably even know, and try to find somebody who really knows the facts and can say, you know, do you know why this is happening today? This is what the BLM says, but do you know the rest of the story? Because this is really not a complete story without this. And then you tell them what's coming in, whether it's the cattle or the sheep. And then you get a resource for them that they can use, that they have permission to use, so they don't have to go on Googling and trying to find something. Because these days, permission to use video is a big deal. We have to get stuff signed. We can't just go to Instagram and pick it off. You have to have, everything has to be signed. So if you own some of that video because you've shot it yourself of sheep or cattle on an HMA, or you know somebody who has it, you can say, well, I've got video for you then, and you have our permission to use it. You can offer that up. I think you will see that included in more broadcast stories, because right now like you said, it just becomes this little thing that gets tossed away. But I think if we can offer the video and say, here's the real reason these horses are being removed. Let me show you the cattle that's coming on here. This is from last year at this time, whatever it may be. How often have you looked on TV and seen a wild horse story that you saw cattle? Anybody? Rarely. You see the pretty horses, you never see what comes behind them to finish eating, or the sheep.
I would like to say one more statement about, I have Senator Warner here in Virginia, and I went in on the wolf issue, and then I asked if I could come back in and talk about the wild horses, and they said, what about wild horses? So I made an appointment, came back in, and they actually had the legislative liaison in DC zoom in, but before I got in the room, 2 of the people started asking me questions. And then I asked if there was some way to keep engaging, and they actually had a once-a-month roundtable for constituents to come in, and they had different staff people there, and I did that for like 9 months until COVID and stuff started happening. But if you call them and ask how's the best way to engage with them, sometimes it's town halls or this and that. You know, once they get to know you, and I've had people call me and ask me a question, and or you know, and the second time I went in, she goes, "Oh, I saw some legislation come through about the horses, and we talked about it." So it just they knew about it then, so it became something to them instead of just a paper.
Exactly, and here's the other thing too, and take this back home to your friends and people that are not able to be here. I think it's very intimidating for some people to call their congressperson. And they think, oh my God, what am I gonna say? How am I gonna do it? Okay, one, is just starting to change now that live people are answering the phones, but for the longest time, all you got was a recording or you left a voicemail. So now they're answering the phones again. The people answering the phones are usually the lowest staff person or an intern. The one that answered the phones today at one of the offices was on a 3-month internship leaving tomorrow. A young man named Lucas, delightful, he's going to go learn Russian. So the fact is that there's probably going to be a 22-year-old answering that phone with a very young voice, and you're going to be friendly and helpful. And I'm sorry, what is your name, Lucas? Hey Lucas, how are you doing today? You know, I've got this thing going on with wild horses, and I really need to talk to somebody about it, and what's the best way for me to do that? You know, you just disarm them by being courteous, respectful, cheerful. You'd be amazed. I mean, you know, the kill them with kindness thing. I mean, that goes a long way. These people get phone calls where they are getting screamed at, cursed at, berated. So when you get a nice person, they're like, oh God, I get to stay on the phone with a nice person for 3 minutes maybe. And so go ahead and encourage people. And you know, if you have a friend who really doesn't want to do it, do a little play role acting. You know, one of the things I do when I mentor students coming along is okay, well, let's do that interview, and I'll be so-and-so, you know, I'll be your subject, and you start asking the questions. And so we'll just do a little role play, because it kind of takes a little of the edge off, and they get better at it. We all need to get better at just our interpersonal relations, so we don't put people up on this stand that we feel like we can't approach them. These people work for us, technically. I mean, we all pay their salaries. And there are ways for you to get your message out. It's just you have to kind of suck it up sometimes and get a little bit of courage to do it, to make that phone call. Go ahead, Marty.
I'm her witness today. I've never seen anyone come to Capitol Hill that the members of Congress that we met with, the members themselves, knew someone as much as they knew her today. So her formula works.
Thanks, thank you. So, okay, was there a question there? I'm not sure, but yeah, go ahead,
Can I
Heather.
just end that with that Linda and I handed out a bunch of fact sheet packets to people on the Hill today. First of all, they are children. They are like 22. I mean, no offense to
Youngsters over there.
But they made me feel old, you know, and I'm only 49. So they really are children. But a couple of the girls did come up to us and said, and one of them's going to follow up with you, by the way.
Yeah.
With McLean's office, and then another girl said, you know, I'm in so-and-so's office who's introducing some new legislation today that has to do with this. So they really do want to talk to you. They do want to know about it. Everything you guys said and the things that Marty said yesterday are absolutely right. Don't be scared of them.
No, don't be scared of them. I mean, today it was so interesting how, I mean, you'd walk in these offices and there would be like 3 or 4, and there was nobody under 25 in there, Marty, was there? I mean, it was crazy. I mean, they were all so young, and they also never know who's coming in the door. I mean, for all they know, you could be this powerful politician in charge of something or another. So they all look at the door expectantly when you walk in, like, who's coming in now, you know? And so if you can kind of flip that, really, and you can do more than you think you can. And some of these young people especially, and these are tomorrow's leaders. I mean, so those conversations that you have today, you know, I mean, I'm so happy that we have a 14-year-old that's going to be doing this afternoon, because my belief is that part of what we need to be doing, and this is like a whole nother issue, but I think we need to be getting to the young people out west who come up in that ranching thing, you know, where it's their family, their grandfather did this, their father did this, and let's say they're in future farmers, or maybe there's a future ranchers of America. But we need to be getting our message out to some of those young people who are going to be the future ranchers, the future food providers, the future leaders and politicians, and get to them before they become hardened in this doctrination that wild horses are a huge problem.
Can I just say one more quick thing? I saw this interview. It was with a family of ranchers. And, you know, the 2 younger ones, they would say, do you really want to carry on with this? And they said, we almost have no choice, because a lot of the community counts on them in all the jobs. But they said they had gone to college and they had other pursuits, but they felt they had to come back and ranch. So we can hope that maybe they've learned different practices and different, more sustainable things. But it's interesting that it is kind of, we can reach some people because people are on a decision-making journey right now as things change hands from older generations to the younger ones.
Thank you guys so much. Anything else you want to say, Vickery, to end?
Yes. get the daily roundup from the Public Lands Council. It's news every day about what they're achieving legislatively, and it will give you an education that you will not get otherwise.
Can you
They
repeat
know
that?
who the Public Lands Council is, and we told them.
Just Public Lands Council is,
Everyone who grazes on public lands.
yes, exactly, and Caitlin Glover is a spokesperson for the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, but she is also, one of the, communications people for the Public Lands Council. And so what you will learn is what their legislative objectives are and what their opinions are. And, I think another thing, just in terms of, gosh, I wish this thing was taller.
I was gonna say, it should be able, you should be
You
able to
could,
stand.
if you stand up, we'll
You
hear
just
you.
stand up, we can hear you.
Okay. Shoot, I lost my train of thought.
Caitlin Glover.
No,
Caitlin
no,
Glover.
no, not Caitlin Glover. Oh, yes, how to get ahead of what the BLM is doing, okay? Look at those press releases. Whenever a press release comes out on a roundup, within a couple of days, they'll get coverage of it. The press releases go out maybe 4 to 5 to 8 days in advance of a roundup. What I think is worth doing is having a press release ready to go for every roundup, so that as soon as the Bureau of Land Management drops a news announcement on that roundup, you will send your, your companion press release on the counterfacts. And by looking at their website, you will know how to schedule these things. So you can get out in front of it and be proactive as opposed to being reactive. Because reactivity doesn't get the message out. It just comes off as defensive. And I think this is something that is completely doable. But again, it requires, unity and resources and a lot of common agreement. I think you all share the same goals, and whatever differences exist can be gotten over in order to get that done.
So are you saying we should send our ready-to-go press release a day ahead of the BLM?
No, what I'm saying is that watch that page. So I watch the BLM's page
Right.
every day. And so if I was in charge of this program, overseeing it, as soon as that went out, I would, because with the environmental assessments, I guess, to tell when these roundups are going to happen or something like that. It's not like it's a mystery. So you can do all the advanced work, put the right data together. The handout that Cynthia and I did was specific to, I think, sand wash, and it had the numbers specific to
Wyoming, it was the Wyoming.
Oh, it was Rock Spring. It had the numbers in it that were specific to, what the cattle's, AUMs are versus the wild horses. And the purpose of pulling that information together was to immediately fire that off as soon as the Bureau of Land Management announces that the roundup's about to take place. And it's doable, but you can't do it, here and there by individuals, just, well, maybe we should do one now. Like you have to have a program, an actual program with, dates and deadlines, but it's all doable.
Yeah, so that made me think of a couple things. First of all, what she's talking about with that handout, and we'd be glad to show you what that looks like if anybody wants to see it, but it was specific to the Rock Springs. It was the checkerboard. The checkerboard, because they went in and did like 3 or 5 different wild horse herds over a period of months. And so when we ran the numbers, we had very specific numbers in terms of the cattle versus the horses and the forage and how much that all added up to. So it was right there on that page, that went out.
Plus Pierre's map.
Plus Pierre's map.
For that HMA.
For that HMA. And you could just see all the red on it, and there it was, all the cattle damage. And so if that were to go, something like that were to go out every time the BLM drops a press release on a roundup, I think that would be pretty powerful. I think it'd be hard to ignore. Here's the other thing regarding sending press releases that I wanted to make sure you guys knew. Press releases come into my station Typically, they come into info@wtvt.com. Maybe they get seen, maybe they don't. Maybe they end up in a file folder. Maybe they get duped into something in what's called the assignment file, never to be seen again. I'm not saying you don't send it to those general mailboxes, you do, but you are so much better off if you have one or two people that you can send it to personally within any media organization, just like what she's got now over at, the Steamboat Springs. But if you do that with the TV stations in your area, with the newspapers in your area, the magazines, whatever that periodical or media outlet may be, then you're ahead of the game. So you're making contact with a live person and you know they're getting it, as opposed to just going into the abyss of what might and might not be covered.
And one of the other beauties of the handout was that it was not a lot of information.
Yeah.
I think there's a tendency when trying to explain what the wild horse issue is about and the livestock issue is to go on and offer lots of information, and it's too much. So the nice thing about the handout was that it was a very focused message with a beginning, a middle, and an end. I think what you really want to do is not overburden reporters, because if you do, they just shut down. So we wrote it so that it would be manageable and digestible.
Thank you, and anybody who has a question, of course, we're gonna be here in and out, so, we'd love to answer questions. And Heather and Lisa know how to get in touch with us too. They have our emails, and so you can always, follow up with any questions or whatever if you need them, okay?
Thank you so much.